Get this. The head of the so-called January 6th committee? Yeah, well, that guy claims that invoking the Fifth Amendment means that someone is, and I quote, part and parcel guilty. Really? Really? And guilty of what? Hi, everyone. I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV. And you got it, Mississippi Congressman Bennie Thompson, a Democrat, of course, is making the most of his 15 minutes of taxpayer-funded fame. Actually, I should say, thanks to the incessant narrative pushing of the pop media and the overall strategy of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi to make the January 6, 2021 chaos at the Capitol seem like it was something that it wasn't. Well, Benny's actually getting a lot more than 15 minutes of fame, and he's burning a lot of taxpayer cash as he runs his little show. The most recent indicator of how desperately unhinged are he and his fellow storytellers from actual reality and from the Constitution that he swore to uphold is Thompson's recent claim that should former Trump administration Department of Justice official Jeffrey Clark or anyone else invoke or use their right to remain silent, aka their right not to engage in compelled speech, well, that is supposedly protected by the Fifth Amendment, by the way. Well, Thompson says that he and others are
part and parcel guilty.
As Tim Haynes writes for Real Clear Politics, quote, Representative Bennie Thompson, chair of the January 6th committee, told MSNBC's Rachel Maddow, and boy, what a tough interviewer she was, on Wednesday, what it means that former Trump DOJ official Jeffrey Clark says he plans to invoke the Fifth Amendment when he testifies. End quote. Get ready for guilty before proven innocent. Guilty of what? They're not really explaining, but guilty before proven innocent will be the baseline from the Democrats, and it's going to be coming from Thompson in 3, 2, 1.
We will give Mr. Clark his right to assert his Fifth Amendment before the committee should he choose it. We're doing everything we can to show that we are not partisan. But you know, if you say you haven't done anything wrong, but on the other hand, you want to assert the Fifth Amendment in terms of self-prosecution, it says that you have something to hide.
Actually, Mr. Thompson, it doesn't say that. You say that. And as expected, Rachel Maddow lapped it up just like Joe Biden consuming an ice cream cone, never wondering at the near radioactivity of your nonsense. In fact, you even doubled down on your astounding claim, Mr. Thompson, by saying,
but if he's saying, okay, I'll come, but I'll plead the Fifth, then in some instances, that says you're part and parcel guilty to what occurred.
No, it doesn't say that, Mr. Thompson. And even if it did, what precisely are you, Pelosi, and your ideological ilk claiming was the crime? As I've noted for MRC-TV, not a single person apprehended, and by the way, most are still being held in terrible conditions as they wait and wait for trials. Not a single person apprehended that day was charged with insurrection. They were charged with unlawful entry, trespass, destruction of property, and resisting arrest, among other, much more minor charges. And even those charges must be heard in court, Mr. Thompson. Now, what is this all about when it comes to Jeffrey Clark? Well, it has to do with something else on which Mr. Thompson is incorrectly grandstanding, even as Mr. Thompson tries to mold public opinion. The subject about which the Dems want Clark to testify in deposition or before Congress is his work with Donald Trump when he was president to look into election abnormalities and possible violations of state election laws following the official day of the 2020 presidential election. Clark served as acting head of Trump's Justice Department Civil Division at the time, and the Democrats are trying to target his post-election date work checking into whether state presidential election statutes were violated. For example, in Pennsylvania, the state attorney general, Josh Shapiro, allowed absentee ballots to be counted beyond the date allowed under state statute. Now, of course, there isn't anything illegal about that kind of work for the president. But the Democrats are not only claiming that that work was wrong, they also have infused the activity with a hint of racism, claiming that Trump and Clark were trying to disenfranchise minority voters. And they claim that Trump and Clark's attempt to check into the irregularities, and of course, the Democrats don't even bother acknowledging any possible problems in places like Pennsylvania and Georgia and Arizona, Nevada, or even Michigan. They claim that that was a trigger to convince folks on January 6th to engage in the big insurrection that, well, wasn't an insurrection in any way whatsoever. So, how does this all tie together? Well, grab some popcorn, because the January 6th committee is one long fantasy presentation, and it has grave implications for the separation of powers doctrine that has suffered, well, pretty much since the time the Constitution was ratified. The specifics of Clark's immediate conflict with Congress were actually spelled out December 3rd in a very good piece by Joseph Clark for the Washington Times, and I think they're worth covering simply to provide more context before we dive into the big lesson about separation of powers. Quote, former Trump Department of Justice official Jeffrey Clark has postponed his scheduled deposition before the House committee investigating the January 6th attack on the Capitol due to a medical condition, the committee announced Friday. Committee spokesperson Tim Mulvey said in a statement that Mr. Clark informed the panel through his lawyer of an ailment that precludes his participation in the deposition scheduled for Saturday. Mr. Mulvey said Mr. Clark provided ample evidence of his claim. Chairman Thompson has agreed to postpone the deposition until December 16th, Mr. Mulvey said of Committee Chairman Representative Bennie G. Thompson. Chairman Thompson wishes Mr. Clark well. Which leads us to Thompson appearing with leftist television hosts like Maddow to, well, maybe not wish Mr. Clark well, but instead to start preemptively misconstruing Clark's possible use of the Fifth Amendment. And that leads us to the larger observations about both this exhausting and shallow insurrection and election tampering narrative, and about the more fundamental and long-term problem, the supposed power of contempt of Congress. Now, to my eyes, this Pelosi show trial was set up for two reasons. First, they want to extend the false narrative of insurrection and the associated implication that many conservatives and small government boosters are radicalized and dangerous domestic terrorist threats. And second, they want to specifically target certain people. They want to bind them up in congressional subpoenas, and then when those people don't answer or don't answer in a way that the Democrats want, well, the Democrats will cite them for contempt of Congress or try to get them in some other legal way. For example, through perjury before Congress if they do answer something incorrectly. Simply put, there's no provision in the U.S. Constitution for so-called contempt of Congress. Zero. But of course, never underestimate the desire of Congress members to expand their power. So in 1857, Congress passed a statute claiming the power to find someone in criminal contempt, a statute that completely contravenes the Bill of Rights assurance of a jury trial and also breaks the separation of powers, since a finding of guilt or innocence or anything is supposed to be done through the judicial branch. Instead, folks like Thompson say they can imprison the accused, as they call them, and will hand their finding of contempt to the Department of Justice for prosecution. And if there is a jury, well, it won't be a jury of peers, it'll be a grand jury, not a regular jury in any way whatsoever. Do you get it? It's Justice Washington style, and all in the service of the narrative and the goal of targeting specific people that the Dems want to bind in costly legal procedures. Essentially, this is a star chamber power that they are adopting and that other Congresses have adopted in the past, and it is completely unconstitutional. By the way, Rachel Maddow, as she listened to this, she didn't bring up any of these points. She just rolled with it. She seems very supportive of the idea of doing this sort of thing to Americans. One wonders what she would say if Donald Trump and his allies were the ones in power doing this. Standards? Don't look for them on MSNBC, that's for sure. Hey, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Remember, if you're watching on YouTube, like and subscribe, share the videos if you can. We'll see you in Facebook. We'll see you on Rumble. Don't forget Rumble. They don't censor our videos there. It's a terrific place to be. Really, really nice. And we'll see you on Twitter. We'll see you on TikTok and Instagram as well. And if you get the opportunity, go to the MRC Store for Christmas. There's some great items there. And as I mentioned before, they kind of tweak the collectivists sometimes. It's kind of fun to watch their faces. Yeah, it's cool. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, everybody. And again, please like and share the videos. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.